Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's actually really hot out here today, which is awesome because it's the first time in a long time, but I gotta have the windows open and a fan going, so I'll hopefully be able to edit the audio properly, but it might take me a couple weeks to get back in the swing of making sure that you don't hear any of the background noise. So I'll do my best as always, but apologies if you hear birds chirping or a fan or anything like that. But let's jump in and see what we got. Starting us out are a couple questions from Jason Guffey, and I'm going to start with the second one because I actually have a solid answer to that. But the question is, they have a Sony Vega HD CRT, and they're curious what kind of content I think would really pop on it. So definitely, without a doubt, any native 480p content, or if you're either taking Blu-rays and outputting them as 480p, which the PS3 does a really good job of that, by the way, or if you're doing something like inverse telecine to take a DVD that was originally 24p and you use that to make it 480p, I think those really, really stand out. So the Wii, any older movies, any older TV shows. I watched so many X-Files episodes from the Blu-ray, but outputting in 480p. So it's such a perfect fit for stuff like that. And I think even modern content might fit depending on if it feels like retro to you. But I think that's really where that stuff absolutely shines. And if I had a big warehouse and one or two CRTs for every use, my widescreen HD CRT would be specifically for the Wii, the PlayStation 3, and maybe a couple of other stuff, but really it would be focused on those two, as well as, having a TV streaming box connected to it as well. Now, the 1080i upscale processing, that's going to really need a video all in itself, which I have a script partially written. It's going to be such a huge undertaking. I got to find time to carve out to do it. But essentially, HD CRTs all run at about the same frequency, 33 consumer grade HD CRTs, not BVMs or professional video monitors that do multi-format. The ones from Sony, Toshiba, etc., Panasonic. And they generally run at about 33.75 kilohertz. Now, there's a catch where some will also run natively in 31, so 480p, but for the most part, they're at about 33 kilohertz, which, much like 15 kilohertz is either 240p or 480i, then 33.75 kilohertz is either 540p or 1080i. And the purpose for that is being able to have things that were native 480i and just scale the video, but still leave them interlaced, which, depending on what your source is, that might actually look awesome. A lot of them have their own deinterlacing built in, but most of them add latency. Now, latency on a CRT, still drawn one single line at a time, so there's no motion blur, or at least nothing like you would see on LCDs or plasmas or OLEDs due to their lack. They don't use sample and hold; they just draw everything one line at a time. So your eyes will perceive that, your brain and your eyes, as much less latency. So let's say you have a crappy old LCD monitor that's the same exact size and it has one frame of lag, but then you have an HD CRT that's 2 frames of lag. You're probably going to perceive that as about the same, or the CRT being even better because of the way the image is drawn. Now, some CRT HD CRTs don't have latency. Some only have it if you send it an interlaced signal, and some, like the Sonys, will always have some unless you disable the extra processing and feed it exactly 33.75 kilohertz, and then you can get zero latency out of that. So Jason mentioned doing that on it. The other thing to understand too is most HD CRTs will not accept 720p. Most of the Sonys do, but then those are downscaled to 540p, and it usually looks totally fine, especially for video content. But no HD CRT will produce the proper look for 240p. So that's why, it might seem like, oh, wow, this must be the holy grail of CRTs for gamers because it has composite S-video and component, but it also has HDMI and it also does. No, if you basically have to treat, if you want to put 240p into it, you have to treat it the same way you would a VGA CRT monitor. And then I'll leave a link to that video I did, the classic consoles on VGA monitors. It's essentially the same thing. You just would want to have it converted to output in component video, or a lot of them have HDMI inputs. The ones I do, all do. So yeah, that's kind of a long explanation. And maybe you could consider that a teaser for this eventual HD CRT video, but I would love to do one just to get the info out there for people. Now, Jason's second question is, can I explain what the differences in PC gaming are between stutter, judder, and hitching? And I'm not the right person for that. I could probably fart something out that would be half right, but I don't like doing that, especially when there's other really good sources out there like Digital Foundry, who you called out. So I'm going to politely pass on this one. But if anybody knows of a good video, maybe DF already did one, that kind of goes into the differences, let us know. Put it in the comments. I'm 99% sure links to other YouTube videos should persist. But if not, you could always just type in the title of the video and have people go search for it. So sorry about that one, but yeah, I like to be clear in my info, or just be honest that sometimes I'm guessing. I'd rather just send you to the right person. Last week, Brian Carboni wanted to talk about a SPDIF switch, and I left a link to a Tindy seller that makes some pretty decent ones, and a few people chimed in to also confirm that they had bought that same exact one, and it worked great, so that's awesome. Brian said they might not wait on the SVS and pull their trigger on the Tindy one, because then it might just end up being another tool in their toolbox, which awesome. As long as the price doesn't bother you, I would do it, because apparently that does perform really well. But the question about the DAC, Brian wanted to specify that they're talking about an audio DAC. So SPDIF in, analog audio out, that is compatible with the weird refresh rate of the Super Nintendo. And they have a Ulong D100 from their old headphone audiophile days that they'll try first, but they're not sure how it's going to perform. So the good news is you'll know immediately. If you put on your headphones and it sounds fine, then you're good to go. But if there's pops and clicks, or if there's just noise, or if it doesn't work at all, then it's not compatible. The affordable consumer grade DAC that I have loved, that I've gotten the original recommendation, and then so many people chimed in to say that they loved it too, was the Modi from the company Shit, and that is the company. It's probably pronounced shite, but I don't really care. I still want to say the Shit Modi because I'm a giant child that thinks that's funny. And I'll leave a link to that one as well, but that was really impressive for the price. I say that every time I talk about audio, because I guarantee there's a couple people listening going, those are crap. Anything less than a $2,500 blah, 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 which is fine. I'm sure they're right, but I can't ever afford that. So comparing it to things around the same price range, that really stood out to me. Also, there was a couple other do-it-yourself solutions that people had suggested over the years. There was a couple like manufactured by hand here and there. They all seemed awesome, but that one, the Modi, was the one that you could just buy on Amazon, and it was awesome. I can't remember if I ever tried it with the SNES though, so if you want to give it a shot, definitely chime in and let us know how it works, because that would be post-worthy by itself, to be honest with you. So I'll leave a link to the Modi if you're interested. But yeah, that's my go-to for affordable ones. And then, I mean, you could spend 10 grand on a DAC if you really wanted to. But then everything else kind of falls into place. If you spend thousands, then you're going to need a receiver and an amplifier and all these other, and speakers that are all cost so much money to even hear a difference. So I could, with the amp that I have and those Ascend acoustic speakers, I could clearly hear a difference between the Modi. But if anybody has any other opinions, please chime in. I'm always interested to learn more, but I'll leave a link to that one. Next up, Ariel has a chance to buy a new old stock Dell 17-inch LCD monitor for about 25 bucks. Since it's 4x3 and has both DVI and VGA inputs, is it worth grabbing to use with something like the Dreamcast via VGA or the PS2 with the RetroTink 4K? So this is going to be 100% opinion, but it's based on all the years of messing with this stuff. And my opinion is, if you're going to have a second use for it, absolutely, just pick it up. It's super cheap. Now you have a spare display. But if you said, no, I want to make this like a dedicated gaming display, for that price, maybe, especially if you already have the processor, the RetroTink 4K or an OSSC or something like that. But since it's an older LCD, you're going to get a lot of motion blur. So even if it's a higher or a lower latency monitor, it's going to be perceived by your brain as certainly having a lot more lag than a CRT would. So this is one of those total solution things. Are you going to be building it into something so it's almost like a dedicated arcade cab that you could swivel? Yeah, sure, because you don't have to worry about swiveling flat panels, whereas every time you do that with a CRT, it's got to be off. You might have to manually degauss it, all that stuff. So, I mean, look at your total use case, and it might be something that's fun to pick up. But if you just said, no, it's between this and a cheap CRT, the CRT 100%. So you're going to just kind of have to think about what other uses you have. I have a couple of 4x3 CRTs. There's one still over there that I use all the time for a second monitor. So like when I'm doing live streams and I need to put up a, share a screen, I don't want to have the weird mirror effect of having OBS open in the screen that I'm sharing. So I'll connect that. And, the whole swivel thing for vertical games, that's fun, but they're not going to hold a candle to modern monitors, especially a CRT or an OLED. Next up, Apothecary 2 wanted to talk about the video from Wobbling Pixels that talks about how to get the best quality out of your Wii. And Apothecary said that the video mentions correcting the incorrect aspect ratio when video width is set to frame buffer, but didn't actually show how to do that. They've just been using the RetroTink 4K and eyeballing the video width until it looks like it matches the intended width. So if you're going to 4K, in most scenarios, having the Tink 4K just stretch it so that it fills the image vertically, and then adjusting the width as needed should be everything that you need. And even going to 4K and using CRT mask emulation, it's a lot more forgiving going to 4K than 1080p or 1440p. So while you might need to dial in a perfect integer in some scenarios, for the most part, that's totally fine in almost all scenarios. I'll do that and I'll just kind of eyeball it and say, it looks a little too wide or a little too narrow. And you could obsess about it if you want to, but I think that's a perfectly fine way to go about doing it. However, Apothecary seems to get aspect issues that are not able to be fixed if they output the RetroTink 4K as 480p and run it through the mClassic. And what I would suggest is actually using the RetroTink to get it to 720p and going from there, because that way you already have a widescreen aspect ratio so that the mClassic doesn't need to mess with that at all. It could just take the proper aspect, widescreen 16:9 signal, do its thing, and output it as 1080p or 1440p. There's still a bit of a debate about that because I think the 1440p mode's kind of useless. I think it changes the color compression. You need to get a special EDID spoofer in most scenarios in order for it to even work. But if you want to experiment, the EDID spoofers are real cheap. So I'll leave a link in the description to that one. But just try it as is with 720p going to 1080p output and see if you like how everything looks doing it that way, and just kind of go from there. I think if you want to really have it set to 480p so that it smooths the image in a different way, you could try it, but you might want to just mess around with different output settings. So you might want to output the RetroTink 4K as 640 by 480 as opposed to 720 by 480, and make sure to do the proper cropping and kind of see it that way. So this is going to require a little bit more messing around, but start with what you got. Change the output resolution to 640 by 480, and you need to just make custom mode lines, which that video I showed a while back on proper cadence shows you how to do that. So maybe watch that video for fun, and then you could do that as well. But yeah, I would start with what you have, and then if you want to see what 1440p looks like, you could pick up that spoofer if it doesn't work automatically. But I think those are good places to start, and let us know how it goes. Next up, Captain Retro has a question about SCART audio extraction. They have a Sony CRT that's modded for RGB, but the TV is only capable of mono audio, including the audio from the front headphone jack. They reached out to Retro Gaming Cables to see if they made an inline SCART adapter that reroutes audio, but they no longer make this, and they pointed them to an Amazon link, but the adapter there isn't available for shipment to the US. Do I know of any adapters out there available in the US that would allow them to route stereo sound via SCART? I don't know of any, and you could try to get a custom cable made, but it almost sounds like the better solution in this case would be to mod the TV a tiny bit more. So basically, and this is something that a beginner modder can do as long as the TV was modded properly. And basically, I'm assuming that you have a SCART input on the back of your, or anywhere on your CRT now, and if you wanted to, you could take that, drill 2 holes to have 2 RCA connectors right under it, make sure it's spaced properly, and then just tap the left and right audio from there, and you should be able to just do it that way. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to affect sending audio to your TV. You might need to do some creative wiring, and that could cause the output to go mono as well. So if that were the case, then sure, you should probably worry about it on the output side of things. But what is your total setup like? do you have a dual output SCART switch? Because if that's the case, you could just get a really cheap SCART to composite adapter. They even have switchable ones, and just ignore the composite part and take stereo audio that way. And they could be completely independent from each other. You could also try modding the SCART switch itself. And by modding, I just mean solder ground and audio signal to the 2 pins on the output side and just leave 2 wires dangling. Proper strain relief and all that as well to make sure you don't rip out any pins. But so there's a couple of different ways to go about doing this. But if you found some kind of inline audio extractor, so you plug the SCART cable in and it's got a SCART connector on the other side, that has to be routed properly. Otherwise, you might be messing up your video signals, or even add ground hum to the audio. There's a lot of ways for that to go wrong. So I think modding either your SCART switch or having a custom cable made, or even modding the TV might be a better answer for all of this stuff. So if anybody has any suggestions, please let us know in the comments. But I think you should kind of take a step back, look at your total system, and see what would be the best overall solution. Next up, Fred R said they've been messing around with MMCE on their MemCard Pro 2, which is basically loading games from the memory card. And their question is, how do they build a new VMC with free McBoot and updated OPL, like to be able to keep OPL updated going forward? Honestly, I just used the guide and then kind of rewrote it a little bit myself because that's what I do, and I haven't had any problems since. I can't remember if I've updated OPL and then I let a buddy of mine borrow it to try to do some videos on it. So I can't grab mine to test it, but I think if you just go back and you check out the installation guide that I'd slapped together and maybe skim through the live stream to see if there's anything that helps you there. I can't remember if that live stream was just long and boring or if that had a lot of good info in it. So read the post first, but I think you should just start there and see what happens. And if you're still having issues, maybe check out the 8-Bit Mods Discord, and they might be able to have people there that are already having solutions for it. But I'll leave a link to the post, kind of start from there and see where that gets you. Next up, the dressing gown wants to know what I think they should be looking for in a surround sound system that can handle both modern and retro content. And I think the video I did 2 years ago now, it still articulates my point exactly. And I think I tried to do some clickbait title like surround sound music first or something like that. But it does articulate the point in that when I started building the system down here, I started with a 2-channel amp, a really good one that a friend of mine got for me, and 2 really nice speakers. And that was awesome. But then I started adding, a center channel and surrounds and then the Atmos speakers, and I kind of built it up from there. But I started with a core great product. And I think that as long as you really want to cover the whole gamut for stuff like that, that should still stand. The problem is budget. So for me, when I started out, I think the amp was like $500 and the speakers were $350 a pair, and it was awesome. It was worth every single penny. I ended up moving that amp and everything else and get another one. And I think that amp was like $1,500, but it was the same theory. Did great for 2-channel, but also was a Dolby Atmos surround system that could also handle Pro Logic without any extra equipment. So you got to check your full budget and see what you need for that. But if you have the ability to buy an expensive receiver, I loved mine. I still do. It's got some weird HDMI issues, but the sound quality is so good that I'm more than happy to deal with the little intricacies of it. And then start out with 2 good speakers and then go from there. And then at some point in the future, add your center channel and 2 more. And then if you want, you could start adding little Atmos speakers. But that's kind of where I would approach something like that. But if you said it was the opposite and you're like, no, I actually mostly do more modern stuff. And then, the 2-channel audio is secondary. I don't have a record player. I only have 1 or 2 retro consoles. Then maybe you could look for something that's kind of the opposite, a Dolby Atmos theater with some speakers and then kind of worry about 2-channel later. But I really love how I approached mine. And also, so much content sounds totally fine with 2 speakers. There's some that doesn't mix down properly and you got to be, raising and lowering the volume during different scenes. But for the most part, I've had excellent luck and just getting really good quality 2 speakers very often ends up sounding better as a whole than 5 mediocre speakers. So I'll leave a link to that video. And that's one of those things where if you disagree with every single thing I say in that video, you probably are still going to walk away from it going, all right, that is not what I need. But because of that, I thought of this, and now I want that instead. And so it's one of those things where, while it's mostly opinion based, even if you completely disagree, I bet it's still going to be a help for you. So I'll leave a link for that one. Next up, Christopher Skurick thinks they've reached the end of their quest for CRTs, and they'd like to share a little recap that leads them to a couple of questions. The recap is, over nearly 5 years, they've come across screens in very different circumstances. At first, they were in a hurry and probably overpaid for some beautiful professional monitors. Some really awesome ones, though, so, probably worth overpaying. Then they started taking their time a bit more and managed to find great consumer-grade CRTs, sometimes even for free. Then their first 14-inch BVM and a couple of 2950Qs, which is pretty incredible because all those are amazing monitors. Their latest acquisition was two 20-inch Japanese-made Mitsubishi Diamondtron PC monitors for just $50 for the pair. That's an amazing deal, and those are awesome, awesome displays. So here are the thoughts and questions. Number one, in a way, haven't we contributed to the price explosion ourselves by paying irrationally high prices? And shouldn't the community start valuing the idea of scoring good deals again? Well, I've always promoted just waiting and being patient. I've always, from day one, said, hey, grab any CRT you could find, and you can still find them for free, and then kind of wait and be patient and try to look for the other ones. And as time goes on, it's going to be harder to find all of these things. But when you're talking about paying irrationally high prices, irrational is not the right word. No disrespect meant. It's because everything's relative. So let's say that you found, let's say you discovered Steve from RetroTech, and you've spent thousands on a fully restored, recapped, and calibrated RGB monitor that has all the features that you wanted. That's not an irrational price. That is, you're getting what you paid for. You just essentially bought a rebuilt classic car, and you see how the prices on those explode. And it is what it is. And the more people want something and the less that are available, the more the price goes up. And there's just nothing you could do about that. The thing that we need to just remind our fellow CRT enthusiasts is to not give in to scalpers. And I still all the time will flip on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist and see a TV that should be free or $20 or maybe $50 be listed for $500. Just let those rot on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, and just tell everybody that you know not to buy those things. Just don't let people get ripped off. But I just think that, yeah, sure, we could have not talked about CRTs, but then people wouldn't have known that you could still use them, and they'd all be in a landfill. So you lose either way, and I think that approaching it from a reasonable perspective is more important. Don't support scalpers. Let everybody know when it's something that's obviously scalped, but also educate people on the difference. It's so easy to say, oh, why would anybody spend $500 on a consumer CRT? Well, what if it was fully recapped, and then RGB modded, and then calibrated, and now you have an amazing CRT in good condition that probably lasts the rest of your life? $500, $1,000 for something like that isn't irrational at all. You've just invested in something that's been restored. So I think it's all about education and letting all of your friends and people interested know what's a good deal and what's not. Second, they've been surprised to find that some consumer-grade TVs actually display images just as beautiful as RGB-fed PVMs, maybe with fewer lines drawn, but with impressive sharpness, overall consistency, and pixel art fidelity. Which consumer CRTs give me that feeling too, beyond the purely nostalgic appeal? Anyone that's not in bad condition, which is kind of a BS answer, but it's also 100% true. And I even remember the first time I saw an RGB modded consumer CRT, the TV must have had almost no hours on it. And then I walked in, it was a cruise mod from the original shop in Brooklyn, and I was blown away. It looked better than an arcade monitor because your average arcade monitors are left on all the time. And so my answer to your question is, every time I look at a RGB modded CRT where the tube and electronics are still in good condition, I get that same wow feeling. But on the flip side, anything that has a bad tube is not going to look good no matter what you do, including expensive BVMs and stuff like that. I've seen lots of burnt out BVMs. So yeah, I agree totally though. RGB modded consumer CRTs are incredible. Last and more specific and personal question, the only thing they're still missing is a true multi-sync monitor capable of switching 15, 24, and 31 kilohertz on the fly. If someone already owns great 15 kilohertz and 31 kilohertz displays, in which real-world scenarios is a multi-sync monitor still genuinely useful? It depends, but you might not need it at all. So the two scenarios to just quickly answer your question and then elaborate are if you have no extra space and you only have room for one CRT, that's when it's going to help. Or if your source is constantly using multiple resolutions. PlayStation 2 is the best example because it boots in 480i. Most of the games are 480i, but a good handful of very good games have the ability to run in 480p mode. So you could always add scalars into this equation. You can get a PC CRT monitor and a GBS control and have all of that work for things that are both 15 and 31 kilohertz. But that's when a multi-format monitor really shines. And sometimes you just want nice things. I mean, you have an amazing CRT collection and you don't need another monitor at all. But I'd be willing to bet if you found a multi-format for a decent, fair price, you'd probably pick one up because it's awesome. So those are really the scenarios. But I do want to make sure that people know that on average, you could pick up a fully restored, beautiful RGB monitor that's 15 kilohertz only and a really nice PC CRT monitor that's 480p and up for less than the price of one fully restored multi-format monitor. Probably a lot less than the price of that. So that's really the thing that I want to get across. And like for right now, I have 5 monitors all on rolling carts lined up over there, and each one does something completely different. And I do have one multi-format monitor, but for the most part, I have each one that has a specific use case. So if you're turning a basement into, a retro hangout area, definitely consider that because you could buy the rolling carts, the CRTs, and everything else for less than that. And, if you're building something like that, maybe you don't have all the space, but if you do, just consider that. You could save yourself a lot of money and have a lot of totally different experiences. And I do really love having a couple of PC CRT monitors. My buddy Chris was able to get me the 2 that I use now, and they're both incredible. And I'm able to do things like play Dreamcast the way that it most feels right to play. But I could also watch old TV shows and movies in 480p 72 and have them look insane. So yeah, that's the multi-sync monitors are amazing. And I wish I still had the collection that I used to, but you don't need it unless you have the 2 scenarios I mentioned before. Next up, Pippin is having trouble getting uncompressed 4K captures. So no color compression, 444 color in a 4K resolution. And it is so much harder than you would imagine. This is something that I wasted months of my life on. And even if your capture card could do it, which most cannot, your PC has to be really fast. And on top of that, your SSD has to be really, really fast. I have one of those, 7,500 megabyte a second ones, and I got a decently fast i9 processor. It's a couple years old, and all of those things, 64 gigs of RAM, everything that I could do to have all of this tweaked as best as possible. I still have to reboot the computer when I'm doing uncompressed 4K captures, have nothing else running, and I always have to watch Virtual Dub to see if there's dropped frames. And if so, I have to just reboot again, just kind of double check and make sure that nothing else got installed on my PC. It's really, really hard. So the question I have to ask is, though, why do you need to do that? Because if you're just streaming, there's zero reason for it because it gets compressed. And even when you're doing things like putting together videos to put online, your YouTube's going to compress it. So the only time you would really need and require that kind of uncompressed video capture is if you're doing video analysis, because then you're going to do stuff like zoom in, and that's when you would start zooming in on the color compression by accident. I've seen that so much in comparison videos on YouTube where people end up actually comparing either the color compression or the artifacts that their bad scaler adds to it. So that's when you would really need it. And zooming in, you're looking at stuff. And then even after you do that, you're still going to upload it and it's going to be compressed on YouTube or other services anyway. So I guess what I would first say is, do you actually need uncompressed 4K, or is just, a good capture all that's required? If you do, I'll leave a link to the Live Gamer 4K review. And I think I did, a video on 4K capture as well, which is all really hard, but find the video or I'll check out the video and give it a try, and maybe it'll work on your system if you have everything lined up properly, but yeah. And anyway, the next question, they would also like to know where they could find good quality SCART cables that might not slip off the Games Care switch, as they constantly have to realign it or mess with it until it gets a good signal again. So you could look into the SCART braces, from Kaitor, but I think those would require affixing it to the switch somehow. You could try painter's tape, which is such a ghetto solution, but you're not going to harm anything. The tape comes right off, so you could just wrap the whole thing up like that, and leave some space for ventilation. But that's a good question. Does anybody have any suggestions on that? Has anybody had a solution for the Games Care switch? Maybe Kaitor would be interested in making it for that switch as well. I don't know. Or maybe no. I don't think the existing ones would fit because they're not going to be the same size as like a G-SCART or anything else. So that's a good question. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Next up, a couple questions from Dustin Mattison. First, apologies if I'm tired of this question, but have I heard anything about the Mars project recently? No, I haven't heard anything at all, but I do want to just politely remind everybody that they did not take 1 penny from any customer. So if that project falls on its face, if it comes back and releases whatever, no hard feelings, because they didn't take a bunch of money and sit on it. They're just, they made the announcement and kind of went from there. So no, I haven't heard anything, but there were rumors like, oh yeah, they took everybody's money and run. No, there were no pre-orders. They didn't take any money. So I always just want to make sure I'm clear about that. Whatever opinions you might have of that are all your own and totally fair. As long as you know they didn't steal a bunch of money and run. There was no money from customers taken. Next, another question is they just got booked to perform at an anime convention later this month. They've never been to an anime con, really only just been to one, a wrestling con last year that ended up having a mini acoustic show from wrestler Jeff Hardy. Acoustic show? Like he sings? I didn't know that. But any advice for what to expect? They don't know how different the crowd would be compared to clubs or bars. And oh yes, it's supposed to be an adult show. There's an early all ages show, but they're not a part of that. I don't think I've ever been to an anime con. I've been to mixed cons that have video games and anime and stuff like that. But I think it's just like anything else, right? Every group of people has majority good intentions and everybody's just hanging out and doing their thing. And there's always some weirdos and occasionally some thieves. So just keep your eyes open, just kind of like any other big gathering. But generally speaking, I haven't had any trouble at any cons. It's usually just a bunch of good people doing their thing and a bunch of like-minded people. And all that stuff too it's also comfortable to be around people that understand what it is that you're getting at, right? Like if you go to a country music show dressed in full anime gear, you're going to look weird, even though that's probably not weird at all. It's just the context of where you are. But you dress up like your favorite anime character and go to an anime con, you're just one of the crew. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at that stuff. So I don't know if I had any other advice other than just, expect things to be different and roll with what you get. But sounds like fun. And, hopefully if you're into anime, you'll be able to learn something new and just kind of have some cool experiences. Next up, Charles Madeira is wondering if I'm aware of more ROM hacks or patches available for various games and consoles that are specifically designed to be performance improvements. For example, there's that super impressive high performance patch available for Perfect Dark and a whole bunch of others. In particular, they're probably looking for patches like that for the N64 and PS1, as that console generation probably needs that help the most, but they're curious if I know of others that would work like that. They'd love to see more of those performance patches and are super impressed by the engineering work and think it could really help make these games feel much more playable in 2025. So we did cover that a couple times. I think the recomp projects that allow you to even recompile certain games to run better on the original consoles, those are all amazing and insane amounts of work. Thousands of hours to make something of combined hours from different people to make that stuff happen. There's also just general performance patches, the Vitor Vallejo ones, I think hard driving or race driving, that was the funniest one because the original ran at like 3 frames per second, and it's really cool to see it running like still a bad game, but a more acceptable thing. So you could search RetroRGB for stuff like that. And if anybody has any suggestions of their favorite patch, just let us know in the comments. But this is one of those rabbit holes you could go down and just lose days. And I mean that in a good way, because there's a lot of good stuff out there. You really just got to focus on basically start with your favorite games and just do some searching to see if something like that already exists. It could very well be that you could use emulation to do some crazy enhancements on, using your PC, but that's not often what us retro nerds want. We want the original console and you want the better performance on the original console. But the stuff that comes to mind just off the top of my head are all of the NES to SNES don't want to say remakes, but the conversions that the developers Infidelity and Rumble Mints have done, because now you have the exact same game, but it just runs better. So you're not changing the experience. You're kind of just, I always look at it as this is the experience the original devs probably would have wanted if the console was powerful enough. So that's a big deal. Any of the stuff that takes SNES games and adds the you have to use like the FX Pack Pro or the Mistra project. However, you'd be able to run those games as if they were using the special expansion chips like the SA1 and the faster ROM chips, so you can get better performance that way. So those are the ones that I would kind of start with and see where it goes. But basically search for your favorite games, and I think you're going to be happy with, there's going to be a lot out there, probably not as much as you want, but I think you'll be happy with what you find. Next up, Billy Retro Gamer has a bunch of systems connected via composite video to a cheap switch into a PVM, and they all look great with the same setting on the PVM. There's only one or two systems where they have to adjust the settings, and that could get annoying for just those systems. They're wondering if there's some sort of external device that could be used to adjust the color of a system. That way they could keep the PVM at the ideal setting for most of them, and then just connect this potential device in the signal chain before it gets to the PVM. So I think so, but I would actually step back and look at this from a different perspective. First, are you talking about a PVM that also accepts S-Video and RGB, or is it one of the PVMs that's composite only? If it also accepts S-Video and RGB, for the problematic systems, get either S-Video cables or see if there's an RGB mod available, and start with the ones that are bothering you. That would apply your effort to the right place. And eventually just look to upgrade all of them to RGB. And remember that you could still get composite. So if you like the look of composite for some of them, which a lot of early 3D graphics games and 480i games really do look better with composite video on a CRT, then yeah, now you have the option for both. If you're talking about a PVM that's composite video only, which there's a bunch of them, and you still get the higher TV line count, you still get the better calibration, so it's still great CRTs, then I would just start to say, well, what's wrong with those consoles? And that could be a sign that your capacitors on your video signal are off. So like I've seen Super Nintendos now, they basically all start to need them. Not to the point of like the Duo consoles and the Game Gears, but it's getting to the point where if you want to do any work to a Super Nintendo, count on doing a cap replacement as well. There's not that many of them, so it's not that bad, but I would kind of start going down that road and just understand that at some point between now and never, you're going to have to do a full refurbishing of all older equipment. PS5, at some point, you're going to need to replace bad capacitors and figure out what's going on with it. It's just a matter of time. So if you love these consoles, especially the problematic ones, now is the time to take them apart and, watch a couple of Macho Nacho videos. I love the process Tito goes through of, disassembling everything, cleaning everything up, changing the capacitors, doing any mods that apply to your setup that are important to you, and kind of going from there. So that's kind of my opinion on all of that. You could try to look into things that change colors, but there's anytime you put a different piece of equipment in an analog video signal chain, something's could and probably will change or go wrong altogether. So I try to avoid that at all costs and try to just nail the problem at the root. So if my advice is useless to you, please let me know and I'll try to respond different next week. But maybe if you want, respond with which consoles are giving you trouble, and if your PVM can accept S-Video and RGB, or if it is composite only, and we could possibly go from there. Well, that's it for this week. All the questions just happen to be on Patreon because that's where the majority of people support, but anybody who supports on any of the services, if you want to ask a question, just ask whatever is the latest Q&A post, because the way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post, and it's hard for me to remember sometimes when people send questions as DMs. So just any question you have, go to wherever it is you support and put it in the latest Q&A post, and if for whatever reason I don't get to it, it's probably because the question came in after I was done recording, but before the video was uploaded. So, as always, thanks to everybody who participates in these. I really like just kind of having this laid back interaction with all of you where I get to just kind of answer honestly. And, every week I'm only human. My mood will determine some of the answers to some of these questions. And hopefully everybody understands that I'm doing my best. And if I say something that upsets you, just let me know. Maybe I got it wrong, or respectfully, maybe you would now appreciate a different perspective, but trying my best here, and I do really enjoy these. So thank you to everybody who participates, and especially thank you to everybody who supports in any way whatsoever, because it's really you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.